Jack Thompson, the world had lost its color. He sat on the porch of his modest home, his calloused hands clutching a worn leather collar. The name Max was etched into the metal tag, now dull and scratched from years of wear. Max was gone, and with him, a piece of Jack's soul. It had been 3 days since Max's death, but the pain was still raw, like an open wound that refused to heal. Max wasn't just a dog. He was Jack's best friend, his confidant, his family. For 10 years, Max had been by his side through the darkest moments of his life, the death of his wife, the loss of his job, the nights when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. Max had been there, his warm brown eyes filled with unconditional love, his tail wagging even on the bleakest days. But now, Max was gone, and Jack was alone. The police had called it an accident. They said Max had been hit by a car, that it was a tragic but common occurrence in a town where drivers often sped through quiet neighborhoods. But Jack knew better. He had seen the look in the driver's eyes, cold, calculating, devoid of remorse. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Jack had been walking Max that evening, just like he did every night. They had taken their usual route through the park, Max trotting happily beside him, his tail wagging as he sniffed at the grass. Jack remembered the way Max had suddenly stiffened, his ears perking up as if he sensed danger. And then, out of nowhere, the car had come speeding toward them, its headlights blinding. Jack had barely managed to jump out of the way, but Max hadn't been so lucky. The car had struck him with a sickening thud, sending his small body flying into the ditch. Jack had screamed, rushing to Max's side, but it was too late. Max was already gone, his lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. The car had screeched to a halt, and for a brief moment, Jack had locked eyes with the driver, a man in his 30s with a sneer on his face. And then, without a word, the man had driven off, leaving Jack cradling Max's broken body in the middle of the road. The police had done nothing. They said there was no evidence, no witnesses, no way to prove it was anything more than an accident. But Jack knew the truth. He had seen the man's face, and he would never forget it. Jack spent the next few days in a haze of grief and anger. He barely ate, barely slept, his mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. He knew he couldn't rely on the police to bring Max's killer to justice. If he wanted closure, he would have to take matters into his own hands. He started by retracing his steps, visiting the park every night in the hopes of spotting the car. He memorized every detail he could remember: the make, the model, the color. It was a black sedan, sleek and expensive, with tinted windows and a scratch on the passenger side door. He asked around town, showing Max's collar to anyone who would listen, but no one had seen anything. Then, one evening, his luck changed. He was sitting on a bench in the park, staring at the spot where Max had died, when he heard the familiar roar of an engine. His heart raced as he turned to see a black sedan speeding down the road. It was the same car. He was sure of it. Jack jumped to his feet, his fist clenched, but the car was gone before he could get a closer look. He cursed under his breath, frustration boiling inside him, but he wasn't going to give up. He had a lead now, and he was determined to follow it. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a man possessed. He spent every waking moment searching for the car, driving through the streets of Maplewood and the surrounding towns, asking questions, following every possible clue. He even started carrying a small notebook, jotting down license plate numbers and descriptions of black sedans he saw. His obsession began to take a toll on him. He lost weight, his eyes sunken and bloodshot from lack of sleep. His friends and neighbors started to worry, but Jack didn't care. The only thing that mattered was finding Max's killer. One rainy night, Jack's persistence finally paid off. He was driving through a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of town when he saw it, the black sedan, parked in front of a dilapidated house. His heart pounded as he pulled over, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. This was it. He had found him. Jack sat in his car for what felt like hours, watching the house, waiting for a sign of movement. Finally, the door opened, and a man stepped out. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was him. The same cold eyes, the same sneer. The man lit a cigarette and leaned against the car, his gaze scanning the street. Jack ducked down, his heart racing. He couldn't let the man see him. Not yet. He waited until the man went back inside, then quickly jotted down the address and license plate number. He had everything he needed now. It was time to make a plan. Jack spent the next few days preparing. He bought a gun, something he had never thought he would do, but he knew he couldn't face Max's killer unarmed. He also started following the man, learning his routines, his habits, his weaknesses. The man's name was Victor Kane, and he was a low-level criminal with a history of violence. Jack didn't care about his past. All he cared about was making him pay for what he had done to Max. One night, Jack decided it was time. He waited until Victor was alone, then followed him to a secluded area outside of town. Victor had no idea he was being watched as he got out of his car and walked into an abandoned warehouse. Jack followed, his gun hidden in his jacket, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside the warehouse, Victor was talking on the phone, his voice echoing in the empty space. Jack stepped out of the shadows, his gun pointed at Victor's chest. Victor froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Who the hell are you?" Victor demanded, his voice trembling. "You killed my dog," Jack said, his voice cold and steady. "You hit him with your car and left him to die." Victor's face paled as recognition dawned. "That was an accident," he stammered. "I didn't mean to." "Shut up," Jack snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to make excuses. You took something from me, and now you're going to pay." Victor raised his hands, his eyes darting around the room, looking for a way out. But there was none. Jack had made sure of that. "You think you can just kill someone's dog and walk away?" Jack said, his voice rising. "You think you can destroy someone's life and not face the consequences?" Victor opened his mouth to speak, but Jack didn't give him the chance. He pulled the trigger, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the warehouse. Victor crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Jack stood over him, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. He had done it. He had avenged Max. But as he looked down at Victor's body, he felt no satisfaction, no relief, only emptiness. Jack left the warehouse that night, his heart heavy with grief and guilt. He knew he had crossed a line, that he had become the very thing he despised. But he also knew he had done what he had to do. Max had been more than just a dog. He had been family, and family deserved justice. As he drove home, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Jack thought about Max. He thought about the way Max used to wag his tail when he came home, the way he would curl up beside him on the couch, the way he had always been there no matter what. And for the first time since Max's death, Jack smiled. He knew he would never forget Max, that the pain of losing him would never fully go away. But he also knew that Max would always be with him in his heart, in his memories, in the love they had shared.